What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over several controller Fortnite tips that hopefully will help you improve if you are a controller player in Fortnite. If you've been subbed to the channel for a while, you've probably seen me talk about a lot of these things before, but if you are newer to the channel or newer to the game, or just haven't had a refresher on this in a while, I think a lot of these controller Fortnite tips can be very helpful. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you would like to see more, and comment down below what controller you use in Fortnite, whether it's Xbox, PlayStation, or Switch, maybe. The first thing we're going to talk about is going to be your keybinds, because this is one of the biggest things that kind of limits controller players and holds a lot of controller players back. Because the way controller works, you have the left stick for movement, the right stick for aim, and then you have the face buttons, which you use for a lot of actions like jumping, crouching, even swapping weapons on L1, R1, right? If you have to take your thumbs off the analog stick at any time, that is not ideal. So like, let's say you have X as jump or A on Xbox and you want to jump shot somebody, you're probably going to have to take your thumb off the right stick to hit the jump button. And so you can't actively be aiming while jumping. This is going to matter a lot in fights, but it's also going to matter a lot when shockwave and you're just doing anything in the game. And you can apply that to every action, whether it's crouching, jumping, switch mode if you're a build player, edit if you're a build player. The more you have to take your thumbs off the analog sticks, the more like potential for mistakes there are, or just for some inefficiency. So try to set your keybinds up in such a way where you have to take your thumbs off the stick as little as possible, whether that's mapping actions to the sticks themselves. So like I use right stick crouch, whether that's mapping actions to the bumpers, maybe taking advantage of paddled controllers or pro controllers, which are controllers that have buttons on the back of them. That way you can use the fingers that are on the back of your controller to hit buttons. That way you don't have to take your thumbs off the analog stick. Or even playing claw, where your index finger is on the triangle, circle, X square, or AX, BY buttons at all times. I personally play claw, and I've played claw since like 2008. A lot of people don't like it. They find it uncomfortable. If you find it uncomfortable, it hurts. Don't do that. I'm just kind of giving you the options. With paddled controllers or pro controllers, they are pretty expensive, but my controller sponsor, AIM, is having their 10-year anniversary sale this weekend. And so you can use code EvolveJake or AIM10 if you're in another region like EU or OSH maybe, then code EvolveJake might not work for you and you might have to use code AIM10. But either way, they're having a 10-year anniversary sale, and the controllers are going to be 50% off orders of $270 or more. So you can get a fully customized controller that would cost like if your order comes out to $270, use the code, it'll now be $135. So it's 50% off orders of $270 or more for today and tomorrow, or April 20th and April 21st. Depends on if you're watching the video when it's out of date. Either way, there typically are decent sales there. Obviously, $130 is still more than the average controller for sure, but if you are serious about the game, then getting these custom or pro controllers is an option for you, and taking advantage of a sale like this is ideal. In addition to having bumpers or paddles on the back, you can get digital triggers, which make it to where you don't have to press the trigger in as much to activate it. It's going to make your aim a lot faster, essentially faster reaction time. Same with the buttons and the bumpers. You can make everything as reactive as possible, and those are the main features of the controllers that I would recommend: the digital triggers, digital buttons, digital bumpers, and then obviously the paddles. They do have Hall effects if that's something you're interested in. I have a Hall effects controller. I personally haven't taken the time to get used to it though, because I'm very busy, and you do kind of have to change up your settings with the Hall effect sticks since they're more sensitive. So that ad out of the way, there will be a link down in the description below where you can check them out. And like I said, there's a huge sale this weekend, so I kind of wanted to talk about that a decent amount in this video. The next thing we're going to talk about is going to be your mindset, because this is one of the most common things I see among controller players that really holds them back. Whether it's talking to friends that are controller players, reading Twitch chat, reading YouTube comments, I see so many players that are of the opinion that like every time they lose, it's because somebody's playing on PC with 240 FPS and like the best mouse and the best keyboard ever. And that's every time they lose, it's for that reason, and it's because they're a controller player. If you're blaming your input every time you lose, odds are you're not going to improve. And that's just, you need to like kind of fix that problem before you actually start getting better at the game, I think. And that's just a bad habit a lot of players have. There will be times where maybe your input method is the problem or like the reason for that, but every single time you die, it's not because you're playing on controller. There's several pro players that have done well on controller consistently. The last invitational LAN they had last year was won by a controller player, and that's in build mode as duos, and one player was controller, one was keyboard, and that's in builds. And I think the gap that keyboard has, or the advantage that keyboard has over controller, is much larger in build mode than it is zero build, and my channel is mostly zero build. So try not to blame your input method for everything. Even if you aren't one of those people, odds are you probably know one of them and you kind of know what I'm talking about, you know? So if you actually want to get better, try not to do that or kind of break that habit. The next huge tip I would give to controller players for any game is going to be to take advantage of left stick aiming. One of the disadvantages of controller is that it's harder to make small adjustments with the analog stick. And so one of the ways that you can kind of get this done is by moving your character left and right, because as you move or, you know, crouch, it will move your crosshair. And so you can use the left stick or use your movement to kind of fine tune little adjustments with your crosshair, whether it's left or right. And getting this down and making it a good habit where you consistently are aiming with both your right stick and your movement, I think is very important in every controller shooter I've ever played in my life. Like left stick aiming is just very relevant, and Fortnite is no different. Not only is it going to make it easier for you to kind of make adjustments, but also moving your character around is going to make you a harder target to hit. One thing that kind of sticks out to me if I'm watching somebody who's newer or not as experienced is that they always stand still while shooting, and that's just not ideal. Not only does it make you a harder target, or it makes you an easier target for your opponent, but it makes it a little harder to aim. So I'd highly recommend getting in the habit of left stick aiming. There'll be a creative map down in the description below that I use. There's a shotgun room in here, and there's a movement section in the shotgun room. When you shoot the target on the wall, it'll send force fields at you that you have to dodge while shooting. And this just kind of forces you to get into that habit of left stick aiming. I think it's huge. Another very important factor is going to be to find a sensitivity that feels comfortable to hip fire with. I've seen a lot of people where they make their base X and Y sense really high so they can turn quick, and then they make their aim down sight sense really low. That way they can like be precise while aiming. And you'd think that makes sense. They can react quick and then also be accurate while aiming. But the thing is, a lot of fights in Fortnite, you're going to be hip firing, especially the close range fights. And I think the close range fights are where like the skill gap really is in Fortnite. Those are often going to be the fights that determine the outcome of the game. You can AR people to death or snipe them, but a lot of times you're going to get AR attacks and then push, or get a body snipe and then push. It's not just 90% of your fights are just medium long range. So getting a sensitivity where you can consistently track and hip fire and hit shots on opponents close range, I think is very important for shotgun fighting. If you have to aim in with the shotgun in every fight, not only does it make you more stiff and make it harder to track the opponent, but also it's going to make you more stiff and not be able to move as much, so your opponent is going to have an easier time hitting you. So movement really matters in close range fights. Being able to track the opponent's movement really matters, and if you don't have a comfortable X and Y sense or hip fire sense, it's going to be much harder for you to excel in close range fights. So that's another huge piece of advice I have, would be to find a base X and Y sense that you're comfortable hip firing with, or fighting in close range. Hip fire just means shooting without aiming in. Another thing that can be really helpful and kind of go towards like making you a more consistent player is having a consistent inventory setup. The way you swap weapons on controller is either going to be one direction per button click if you're using the default settings, or if you take advantage of the quick weapon swap setting, then it will be a combination of 2 buttons or 1 button for slot 1. Either way, having your weapons and your inventory laid out in a consistent way is going to build that muscle memory and make you a lot more consistent when it comes to fighting. You're not going to fumble around in your inventory as much because you're constantly putting things in a different slot. So a lot of controller players put shotgun slot 1. This is mainly because of build mode, because the act of going like pickaxe builds back to weapon puts you on slot 1. And if you're doing that, you're probably going to be taking somebody's wall. And if you're taking somebody's wall, you're going to want to be on your shotgun afterwards. So a lot of people put shotgun slot 1 for that reason. But even if you only play zero builds, I think having shotgun slot 1 is beneficial, especially if you're taking advantage of the quick weapon swap setting, because one of the things that does really well is it allows you to get to slot 1 in a single button click, and then you can alternate between slot 1 and 2 with that button click if you're already on slot 1. And so that just really makes it easy to get to slot 1 conveniently, and I think the weapon that you're going to want to get on as conveniently as possible is going to be your shotgun, because if you're in a shotgun fight, that is a fight that is happening whether you like it or not. You know, if you're behind cover and you want to shoot at another person that's maybe behind cover, you have time to swap to your AR. But if someone's on you, you want to get to that shotgun quick. So I would highly recommend putting shotgun in slot 1, especially if you play the quick weapon swap setting. The next thing is going to be controlling recoil. So this is a struggle a lot of people have had recently, because weapons this season and last kind of had a lot more recoil than what players were used to. I still think they're very controllable, and the way you're going to want to counter the recoil is to pull your analog stick and the right stick in the direction opposite the recoil. So if it's going straight up, you just pull down a little bit. And the weapons in Fortnite have weird patterns where they only recoil for a certain amount and then they just stop. And some people look at this and they're like, okay, just aim lower than what you want to. And then by the time the recoil stops, you'll not have recoil, or you'll be where you actually want to be. Like, it'll kick up and then just stop, or they like flick down before they start shooting. I think it's just important to get into the habit of controlling recoil. You just pull your stick down a little bit while shooting. And it also seems like in Fortnite, like once you've hit somebody, the recoil really like either diminishes or just goes away. But either way, I think if you get into the habit of counteracting that recoil, not only are you going to be more consistent in fights where it might be harder to hit an opponent, like if you're going to aim lower on somebody and let the recoil glitch kind of help you, that's not going to work on somebody who's gliding. It's not going to work on somebody in a car, probably. It's not going to work on somebody shockwaving. It's not going to work on somebody airbending mythic, because these people are moving so much, you know? So I think getting into the habit of countering recoil is just essential for any shooter, especially if you're going to want to hit people that are hard to hit, which are often going to be the better players. If you're going to fight someone who's just going to stand out in the open, let you aim at their feet, and then have the recoil kick up to their head, sure, it'll work on them, but they're probably an AI. If you want to fight people that are decent, they're going to be using cover, they're going to be using movement, and so controlling recoil with your ARs, I think, is important, and you just pull your aim stick down a little bit while shooting, typically, and the recoil in Fortnite, I think, is a lot easier than a lot of other shooters. The next thing we're going to talk about is going to be crosshair placement. This is just a shooter tip, regardless of what input method you're playing and regardless of what game you're playing, but I think it's even more helpful for controller, because it's harder to make small adjustments and it's harder to make quick adjustments at times on controllers. And crosshair placement is just going to be putting your crosshair in an ideal spot in case there's a fight. So a lot of players, when they're newer to the game, they'll kind of just be looking at the ground when walking around, and that makes it to where you have to adjust more if you do get into a fight, especially indoors. So if you're indoors, try to keep your crosshair like torso or maybe upper torso level. That way, if somebody does attack you, you don't have to adjust as much. This isn't the biggest thing, but it's like a little thing that can go a long way at times. And then also, if you're medium to long range, kind of getting on somebody with your hip fire and then aiming in can make it a bit faster and a little bit easier than if you like aimed in and then had to make like a large adjustment. So when I have to make large adjustments with my AR, I usually unaim in. This is a lot when tracking people gliding, and people will be like, why are you ADS spamming? It's to make those like snap quick adjustments, because when you aim in, if you're not aimed in and then you aim in, it basically aims you at where the center of your crosshair was. And so you can kind of use the hip fire to make quick adjustments and then aim in. But either way, just crosshair placement is just consistently putting the crosshair, the thing in the center of your screen, at a level where you have to adjust as little as possible to targets. And it's not the end all be all in Fortnite like it might be in a game like CS or Valorant, but it's still very helpful, and it just makes it to where you don't have to adjust your aim as much when a fight does happen. The next thing is just going to be avoid fighting in places where you don't have aim assist. Most notably, this is going to be bushes. So if you're a controller player, you have aim assist, and you know there's going to be those people in the comments that tell me aim assist doesn't work for them. I think a lot of times the people that say aim assist doesn't work for them are people who are expecting like Grand Theft Auto story mode level of lock on. What it does is it lowers your sensitivity when you're on somebody, and that makes it easier to track them and make small adjustments because your sensitivity is lower when you're on target. And if you're a controller player, you kind of get used to aiming at people with that lowered sensitivity, and there's times where you'll lose it just because the game being weird, especially when like you're getting a lot of frame drops. But also if you fight people in or around bushes, if you're in a bush, you won't get aim assist. And if you're shooting into a bush, you won't get aim assist. And this is so people can't just drag their crosshair over the bush and know if there's somebody in it. But what this does is it makes fights around bushes very questionable if you're a controller player. I would recommend not pushing somebody in a bush unless you have them very weak. If I, like, let's say someone's running from me and I bodied them with snipe and maybe AR'd them like once or twice, then they go into a bush, I might push them, but I'm going to do that with the mindset that, like, okay, I'm getting in this bush, I'm not going to have aim assist. And so I feel like it's a little bit easier to deal with if you know you're about to lose it and you know you only need a little bit of damage on the person. Maybe take a little bit more time aiming. But if I have someone that's full HP, I'm not just going to jump in a bush and fight them if I'm a controller player. So just avoid fighting around bushes. You could still use the bushes yourself, but just keep in mind, not going to have aim assist, so you don't want to have the fight actually happen in the bush, even if you're going to start the fight from within the bush, if that makes any sense. Another thing, I think, if you're a controller player, is to be careful with dashes. I don't know if this is actually a thing or not, but whenever I use the Cerberus dashes, I feel like it cuts off aim assist for a little period of time afterwards. And so if I dash and try to shotgun somebody immediately, it can be rough. So I like to shotgun and then dash after I shoot, and then wait a little bit, like a fraction of a second, and then try to shoot again. It's like if you immediately try to shoot after dashing, I feel like there's no aim assist. And like I talked about with the bushes, just being mindful of this and the fact that, like, I don't know if I'm the only one, but I feel like I consistently lose aim assist when using dashes. So, like, I tried to be a little bit more patient shooting my shotgun after dashing, or I will shoot my shotgun, dash to a piece of cover, and then shoot from behind that piece of cover, and then dash to, like, another one, things of that nature. But if you're just trying to dash right on somebody, just be careful and kind of know that you might not have aim assist, so you might want to wait like a little fraction of a second after dashing to actually shoot your shotgun. Another setting change that can be helpful if you're a controller player is going to be to turn vibration off. This is a divisive topic sometimes. Some people really like it and say it's like it's weird to play without it. That's fine. I just don't think it's beneficial for you to be, your controller to be shaking when you're trying to fight and like make small adjustments with aiming and stuff. So I would recommend turning vibration off. Pretty much every pro controller player or serious controller player that I know in other games either turns vibration off or has the vibration motors taken out of their controller, because that is an option with a lot of custom controllers. And it's been a thing since, like, I remember in COD 4, one of my friends told me about this, and then I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Why would my controller be shaking when I'm shooting, or why would I want that, you know? That was like 2008. It was a very long time ago. So I would recommend turning vibration off. The final setting we're going to talk about is going to be dead zones. This is a setting that's confusing to a lot of people, but it's basically just how much you have to move the stick before the game starts to register input in-game. The reason why this is a thing, I believe, is because controllers are mass-produced and there's often problems with them where you'll get like stick drift. And you might have a controller that gets a little bit of stick drift at like dead zone 8%, but not at like 12. And so you can fine-tune this setting and still have it be playable without getting stick drift. I think 8 to 12 range is where you want to be. If you can be somewhere in there without getting stick drift, that's great. I don't really remember what the default dead zone setting is off the top of my head, but either way, having a lower dead zone just makes your controller a little more sensitive, and it makes it easier to make those small adjustments, I think. And so playing around with the dead zones and maybe turning it down if you are on default and you have the ability to do so, because like I said, if you have an older controller, you might get stick drift this way. But I would just recommend trying to play on the lowest dead zone you can get to without getting stick drift. Usually for a lot of people, that's going to be between 8 and 12. And then the final thing I'm going to say is if you play controller on PC, like I do and a lot of other players do not touch your mouse or keyboard while playing, because if you touch your mouse or your keyboard while in a match, you will lose aim assist for the remainder of that match or for a period of time. I don't know why this is a thing. I think it's to prevent people from like using controller just to get like surge tags and comp or something like that. Basically, it doesn't want you to play both mouse and keyboard at the same time, or only use controller for certain situations and then keyboard for the other. So if you're touching your mouse or keyboard during the game, or like once the game starts, you probably won't have aim assist, or you have the potential to lose aim assist, whatever it is. So I would just recommend not touching your mouse or keyboard while playing. I do use a controller scroll wheel, but I don't think scroll wheel is affected by that. And I have other videos talking about that. That'll be linked in the description below. But when I scroll wheel, it doesn't change the buttons at the bottom of the screen. But if you touch your mouse or your keyboard, the buttons on the bottom of the screen will change to the keyboard buttons. And I think that is when you kind of know the game knows that you're playing mouse and keyboard and controller at the same time. Either way, once I ready up, I don't touch my mouse or keyboard at all. But that is going to be it for this video. I hope you guys found this helpful, informative, interesting. As always, if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.